Okay, watch and learn.
Oh, I'm learning all right.
Is this it?
No, it has to load.
Load.
Yes.
This is taking a really long time.
You have no patience.
When you turn something on, you expect it to... Okay, there we go. Crash Bandicoot.
Is there a problem?
No, just, how do you make it go?
After releasing The Last of Us to near universal acclaim and becoming even more of a household name than they already were in the process, Naughty Dog are now back with their first PlayStation 4 game and last entry into the action-adventure series that they started back in 2007 on the PlayStation 3. A series that has become ubiquitous with the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation brand in general. Uncharted is a series that I personally have quite a history with. In fact, Uncharted 2 is the reason I even got a PlayStation 3. And as you can see here, I really like these games, and I'd say that Uncharted 2 in particular is one of my favorite games of all time, with 3 lagging not too far behind. When it was released, Uncharted 2 was unbelievably good looking and set a new standard for AAA campaigns, and its effect is still felt today. You look at the Tomb Raider reboot, or even Quantum Break, which I recently reviewed, and that influence is clear as day. Uncharted 4 itself is a good game by any measure, and Naughty Dog demonstrates once again that they are unmatched in the realm of technical polish and presentation. However, this final entry in the franchise feels a little unneeded from a narrative perspective.
What are the satellites saying, Victor?
Right now, not a goddamn thing. I lost the signal.
Hey, you know what never loses signal? Paper.
Before I even begin to comment on anything else, we have to talk about how gorgeous Uncharted 4 is. Sure, it would have been better if it had stayed at 60 frames per second like it was when it was revealed, and there's been some very slight downgrades visually, but it's hard to complain when the game looks this good running on a PlayStation 4. Naughty Dog are the masters of taking concept art and turning it into something that you can actually play. This is coming from me of all people too, so if I'm impressed by these visuals, then just about everyone else on the planet will be too. Literally everything looks good, from the texture of a sweatshirt to the mud in Madagascar. The entirety of my playthrough, I stopped to look around at the textures, and even under that level of micro scrutiny, you'll be hard pressed to find flaws or anything that looks off. I have no idea how Naughty Dog do what they do graphically, especially on the PlayStation 4. This game somehow manages to make my dying 1080p TV look like it's a higher resolution than 1080p. It gets better though, because if you were impressed by the gameplay footage, you'll be shocked at how stunning the real-time cutscenes are. The character models look outrageously good, and if you look closely at Nathan Drake's face, you can make out that some of his individual facial hairs are graying. Globetrotting to exotic locations is a trademark of the Uncharted series, and Uncharted 4 is no exception. The environments are immaculately well realized and varied, with Madagascar and the islands of Libertalia bordering on photorealism when viewed from the proper angle. While I might prefer Tibet or long-lost desert cities, Uncharted 4 makes up for that with sheer graphical fidelity. Animations are eerily fluid, and not just in motion-captured cutscenes, but in actual gameplay as well. If you sneak attack an enemy, Nate will rip the gun out of their hands, throw it in the air, and then take it for himself. Every time you equip and unequip your weapon, he slides the strap on and off in a natural-looking way. It's the little touches like these that push the presentation to that next level and make Uncharted 4 a noticeable visual upgrade over Uncharted 3 and even The Last of Us. Naughty Dog have yet again raised the bar for what's possible not just on consoles, but in general. The gameplay here is not much of a departure from 2 and 3, but both movement and shooting feel a tad bit more weighty than I remember. In the single player, I was perfectly fine with it and I had no issues, but in the multiplayer, it's a different story, and I'll talk more about that later on. Stealth has been changed here, and for the better. In the previous games, stealth felt out of place and awkward. Now there's an actual indication meter, and enemies will look for you if you're in their line of sight for too long. It's not as hardcore as The Last of Us, but this is an instance of taking something from The Last of Us and toning it down to work with Uncharted. Platforming is largely unchanged, but the levels themselves don't have as many noticeable visual cues like painting everything yellow and red, which makes the environments not only look more natural, but makes platforming slightly more of a challenge and feel more free, whether it's an illusion or not. Then there's the puzzles, which in this game aren't great at all. First off, they're laughably easy, which is saying a lot in the context of Uncharted. The puzzles in previous games were easy too, but not this easy. I was literally solving puzzles by mistake in this game. To add insult to injury, none of these puzzles are even interesting visually, which is the biggest letdown for me. The previous games each had at least one memorable, massive set-piece puzzle each. Uncharted 2 had that massive chamber in the ice caves with Tenzin, and Uncharted 3 had that creative puzzle where you had to move the individual body parts of the statue around and shine the light on it to cast a full statue. None of the puzzles in this game come even close to those. Uncharted 4 does incorporate a lot more ambient scenes where you walk around the environments, which does help to break up the action, and they managed to do it in a natural way like they did in The Last of Us.
Get out of the way!
Whoa, careful! Damn, goddamn truck again!
Naughty Dog have always impressed me with their ability to take what would be cutscenes or QuickTime events at best in other games and turn them into completely playable moments. Uncharted 4's huge visual spectacle is that car chase that was shown in the E3 demo, and every stage of that massive event is completely playable. While there are parts of that chase that were already done in the previous games, like the whole jumping between the cars at 80 miles an hour thing, it still manages to impress with how many different components it combines over such a long span of time.
Hey! Here, take the wheel!
What? Are you out of your goddamn mind?
Yeah, probably! Oh, crap!
Uncharted 4's plot is about a seasoned Nathan Drake that has settled down after 3 games worth of finding lost treasures and mythological cities, as well as that PS Vita outing that Drake himself, and probably you as well, forgot about. In the midst of attempting to live out a normal life, Drake's long-lost brother Sam, that hasn't even been passingly mentioned in a single line of dialogue until this game, reveals to Nathan Drake that he's still alive and needs his help. Of course, help is Uncharted speak for finding a lost treasure, artifact, or mythological city, and Nate is forced to accept because Sam needs to find this treasure in order to pay off his debt to a drug lord that sprung him from his conveniently long captivity. This treasure turns out to be the riches of the infamous pirate Henry Avery, which was the treasure that Nate and Sam were seeking before Sam's supposed death. Helping this brother duo before Sam's death was this trust fund child, Rafe Adler, who is one of the 2 main villains in the game. Sam and Nathan set out to find this treasure, and Rafe Adler is out to do the same, and thus conflict ensues. The introduction of this brother character makes about 0 fucking sense, and you're probably better off not trying to make sense of it, but I just can't help myself. Like I said earlier, Sam is never mentioned by Nathan Drake in any of the games. Then things are made even worse when you consider that in Uncharted 3, there's actually a flashback sequence to young Drake, where his brother is nowhere to be found. So where the fuck was he when this is going on? Then you've got the main villain from that game, Marlowe, who knows all about Nathan Drake, knew him when he was a kid, and constantly mentions his family and parents, but never once mentions this brother. I'm just completely dumbfounded that Naughty Dog of all people, who usually have every little detail perfectly worked out, would center the major plot device of their final Uncharted game around a retcon this massive. Sam isn't the only character that accompanies Drake in this game, though. The equal parts sleazy and charming Victor Sullivan is back, and my favorite character, Elena Fisher, makes quite a few appearances as well. The Uncharted series isn't known for having the best villains, but at least Lazarevich served his purpose of being a generic tough guy in Uncharted 2, and Marlowe's whole manipulative Shadow Society thing worked well enough in Uncharted 3. In Uncharted 4, we have an underdeveloped rich kid that isn't intimidating or intelligent in the slightest, and a random woman that has no investment in any of this and just disappears when her purpose of pushing the plot forward has been fulfilled. Rafe's motivations aren't clear at all up until the last fourth of the game, where they try to work this angle of Rafe being incredibly jealous of Nathan Drake's discoveries and accomplishments, which would have been a good angle to work if the writers would have fleshed it out a bit more and maybe given Rafe himself a few flashback sequences of what happened after him and Nathan went their separate ways. His entire character comes off as being an afterthought, as if this entire story was written and the writers said, fuck, we need a villain, fam. And then, after they came up with Rafe, they realized that a trust fund baby might not be the most intimidating villain that Drake has gone up against. So they then created Nadine, who is basically the muscle, and evidently she's even less of a developed character than Rafe himself is. Nadine is a boring character that's conveniently used whenever the plot necessitates her presence. I mean, in the context of the story, she is literally paid to be there, so her inherent lack of enthusiasm for what's going on is logical, but that doesn't excuse a bad and boring character. There's a moment when Sam asks Nate how this adventure compares to the ones that he missed, and Nathan says, I'll answer that when we're finished. Well, I finished the game, so I'll answer for him. This adventure is the least memorable in the series, besides that PS Vita game. You probably already forgot about that since the time I mentioned it 2 paragraphs ago. This time around, the adventure is about tracking down Avery's treasure, and this leads Sam and Nathan traveling all around the globe to find the next clue that will lead to the final destination. As I mentioned earlier, the puzzle chambers aren't as grandiose this time around, and that sentiment extends out to the mystery of Avery's treasure as a whole. There's not that sense of awe and wonderment about Libertalia, or any of the long-lost catacombs and clues you'll find along the way. Each of Nathan Drake's previous 3 treasures were interesting and kept me fascinated until the reveal of whatever it was at the end of the game. The grand reveal at the end of this treasure is just kind of there, no build-up at all, and the treasure itself is among the most unimaginative in the series. This game comes off as not being about the treasure, though. Uncharted 4 is Naughty Dog's attempt at telling a more mature story about Nathan Drake, exploring what a seasoned treasure hunter's life would be like after swearing he was done treasure hunting. There's much more of an emphasis on the main cast of characters and their interpersonal relationships. I was thoroughly impressed by the performances. Sam and Nathan are both phenomenally well portrayed by Troy Baker and Nolan North, presumably with the help of the writing team. They both do such a good job of portraying these 2 brothers in a believable fashion, to the point where you'll forget how massive a retcon this whole long-lost brother that was never mentioned in a single line of dialogue really is. The only issue is that narratively, nothing really happens that ever adds weight to or utilizes these great performances, and that goes for almost all the characters, really. The only relationship that felt as if it had some sort of development added to it was Nathan and Elena's, which only went deeper into the dynamic that they had in Uncharted 3. It's like there was this grander point that they were trying to reach, but for whatever reason they couldn't make that final step. I love the Uncharted games because there was always moments during the adventure that stuck with me long after I finished playing. Everything from the massive battle with the modern pirates in a ship graveyard to Drake waking up in a Tibetan village with a man speaking to him in a language that he can't understand. Uncharted 4 left me with only one moment that resonated in that sort of way, and it was the epilogue. Naughty Dog gets a lot of criticism for their games being too scripted, too linear, and the gameplay being press X to win. If that were true, then their gameplay wouldn't be good enough to make a compelling multiplayer component, which, in my opinion, they've successfully done multiple times. This time around, they've come through with a decent multiplayer. It's not as good as Uncharted 2 or The Last of Us. In fact, it's actually a really weird middle ground between these 2 very different flavors of multiplayer. As I mentioned earlier, the gameplay is a bit slower and heavier than before, which was fine for the single player, but feels too slow in the multiplayer. Then they've added in this in-game store system where you can use unmatched currency to buy power-ups, weapons, and NPC allies. It works in a similar way to The Last of Us, where objects, or in this case money, will spawn randomly around the map and you collect it to buy items. Uncharted 3 experimented a little with the whole power-ups around the map thing, but the mythicals and NPCs in this game, it's just too much in my opinion. There's a litany of unlockable costumes, attachments, and guns, with all aesthetic items being acquired in a way most reminiscent of Halo 5's requisition packs. Every day there's 3 objectives that can be completed to unlock points to buy these chests that reward random unlocks, but because it's 2016, you could always just buy Uncharted points with real money and bypass all the waiting. It's not pay to win, but I'm so sick of these random unlock systems. Just have an in-game currency system where you can pick what item you want to work towards, or tie items to certain trophy unlocks and other in-game challenges. Nonetheless, Naughty Dog did wisely choose to have the multiplayer run at 60 FPS 900p rather than the 30 FPS 1080p of the single player. It does look noticeably worse than the single player, but who cares, it's multiplayer. It might not be the best multiplayer they've ever done, but it's a solid addition to the single player, and for me personally, I'll get a few more hours of enjoyment from this game that I wouldn't have got from other single player centric games like Quantum Break that don't include any multiplayer component, or even worse yet, single player centric games that feel the need to shoehorn in a multiplayer mode that sucks.
Where do I start? Start with the best part. Okay, a few years back, I got roped into breaking into this Turkish museum to steal this oil lamp, okay?
Oil lamp?
It was an artifact from Marco Polo's lost treasure fleet.
Kublai Khan's treasure.
Yeah, and as it turns out, there was a whole hell of a lot more on those ships than just treasure.
Score-wise, I'm feeling around a 7.5 out of 10 on Uncharted 4, which might sound surprising because this review could come off as me hating the game. Well, I don't hate the game. As the score would imply, I think that Uncharted 4 is a good game that can't make that final step to being great or exceptional. The reason I critique this game so heavily is because of how good the previous two titles were. I hold these games in the highest regard. I consider Uncharted 2 and 3 to be close to, if not outright, 10 out of 10 quality games that, for better or worse, were and still are a proposition of what the future of AAA campaigns might look like. While this final entry might take the polish and technicality to that next level and set the golden standard once again, Uncharted 4 isn't leaving the kind of impact on me that the previous entries into the series did, except for that PS Vita game. Now you're going to remember the PS Vita game for sure because I mentioned it at the end of the video.
The start button.
I knew that.
All right.
I got it.
Okay, so you want to run towards the camera.
Run to the camera. I got it.
And the circle button is your spin attack.
Spin attack!
Yeah, press X to jump.
Right. Which one's X?
Right thumb. Okay, run away from the boulder.
Why is the boulder chasing me?
Just run away from it.
I did nothing to this boulder. That spinning hurt.
That was not too bad.
What is that thing, a fox?
A bandicoot.
Looks like a fox. It's like a fox in jeans. Ow! Oh, that had to hurt.